So welcome everybody to today's F1 live lesson, F1 English. We always look at different topics over the various weeks, and we have been looking at poetry, and then we started looking at character descriptions and how you can build up characters, because this is something that you'll have to do in your creative writing piece for your exam. So let me share my screen with you. And don't worry, if you've never been to a live lesson before, it doesn't matter where you are in the course, you will always learn something from the live lessons, all right? So let's look at chapter 4.1 from your student books, your green student books, the stage 8 books, which continues on from this idea of how you develop a character. And this specifically is about analyzing how description shapes character. So we've already touched on this last week, and I want to look at it a bit more closely today, because we ran out of time last week, so it'd just be nice to continue on from where we left off. All right, so this comes from your student book. If you want to follow your student books, feel free to. This is from your student books, pages 92 to 95. All right. Okay, so then that means you can turn to page 92 if you want to. You don't have to, you can follow on the screen. Page 92 of your student book, green one, stage 8 book. And it says on page 92, it has an image of a little boy. And the image says, and the page says, look at the image on page 92 of the student book, then complete question 1. So this is all about describing a character. All right, and like I said, this relates to when you write your paper 2 exam or progression test, section A, because the progression tests are very much a mirror of what you will, of the kinds of things that you'll get tested on in the exam. Okay, all right, so let's go down to describing a character. Just by looking at this image of a little boy, what details can we discover about him, okay? For example, from the amount of food in front of him, what could we say about his character just based on the amount of food in front of him? Any suggestions? Okay, I'm going to put a suggestion out. Okay, he loves cake, that's for sure. He loves cake. Look at this huge slice of cake here, right? And also, we could possibly say, so he loves cake. And could we say he's greedy, perhaps? Does he need such a huge slice of cake? I don't know. We could say greedy, maybe. Remember, we're just inferring. We are just guessing at these things, inferring, right? Let's have a look at what we think their feelings are about food in general, just from this picture. What do you think his feelings are about food? Yes, he might want to clean his face, and yes, the cake looks yummy. I don't know why I have to torment you so early on in the morning. Forgive me. He loves to eat. Yes, he loves eating. Good. And enjoys food. Look at that smile on his face. Okay. So just from looking at an image, we can already get an idea of the sorts of character this person might be. Well, when it comes to food anyway, right? Okay. Okay, so let's have a look at, just have to move down now. The text that is described at the top of page 92, you'll see that if you look in your books, it says, writers use many different techniques to describe characters and show their thoughts and their feelings, because that's how we learn more about a character. You need to be able to identify and explain how writers create characters in descriptive writing so that when you have to do it, you can do it too. All right. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And specifically, we're going to be looking at the legend of King Midas. Okay, the legend of King Midas. What is a legend? Does anybody know what a legend is? I'm going to come to the chat box. What is a legend? What do we mean by legend? No problem. A myth, yes. There's a link between legends and myths. Okay, good. Okay, but what are those? Somebody asked you, what's a legend or a myth? What would you answer? An old story. Yes, that's right. It's an old story that you don't necessarily know if it's based in history or not. You just know it's come down from the past, but you can't quite tell if it really happened or not. And that's how it became a legend. It's almost like it's spread by word of mouth. Okay, so legends can generally be based on something that is true, or they can be greatly exaggerated, and that might be what's happened with this legend of King Midas. So in the legend of Midas, the king makes a wish that everything he touches will turn to gold. His wish comes true, but he soon realizes that it makes life impossible. And there's generally a moral to these kinds of stories. And those of you who know it might know the moral that comes with the story of King Midas. And it's a set saying that we use when somebody thinks that something is too good to be true, or some situation might be better than what it actually will be. Do any of you know the moral to King Midas? Yes, everything comes with a price. We're getting there, yes. Be careful of what you say or what you wish for. That's right. But more specifically, is there an idiom, an everyday saying, idiom, everyday saying, idiom? Sorry, that didn't come out very well. Let me rewrite it up here. An idiom, which is an everyday saying that you can relate to the story or the legend of King Midas. And I'm just going to give you a hint. Okay, I'm going to start the moral. All that, yes, what is it? All that, here's your clue. See how general knowledge, how good it is. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. There is that, yes. Yes, that could work. Yes. Don't preempt that something's going to be so successful when possibly the outcome is not as successful as you think it may be. All that. I'll give you a few seconds to type. Okay. So just to save on time, it is all that glistens, or one of the versions of this is glitters, or even glisters. All that glistens or glitters or glisters is not gold. Okay. Have you ever heard of that before? All that glitters is not gold. All that glistens is not gold. Okay, keep that in mind as we read through this story. All right. Okay, so number 2 on page 92 or page 93 says, read the following extract from the start of his story, of Midas' story. And this extract is based on Tales from Ovid by Ted Hughes, who's a famous poet. And so he rewrote some of the Greek myths as a poem or in extended poetry. Midas said, "Here is my wish. Let whatever I touch become gold. Yes, gold. The finest, the purest, the brightest." Okay. So he's expressed his wish, and he wants whatever he touches to turn to gold. Okay, that is the main storyline here. So I'm going to pose these questions to you. What is Midas greedy for? Okay, let's bring up the chat. Gold, yes. Okay, oh, some of you have never heard that saying before. Okay, gold, yes, it's gold. And we know this because it's stated at least twice here. So how has the writer used repetition to help the reader understand that Midas is greedy for gold? Okay, how has the writer used repetition? Look at the way that that is phrased, that repetition. And good morning to those of you who just came in. How has the writer used repetition to help the reader understand what Midas is greedy for? It's quite a difficult question, so I'm going to answer it. So he says, let whatever I touch become gold. Oh, and here's a question. What is repetition? Oh, sorry. Okay. So that's when something is repeated. An idea is spoken of again, or is written about again here. So let whatever I touch become gold. Okay, no problem. And yes, gold, the finest, the purest, the brightest. Okay. And so repeating an idea emphasizes his desire for this gold, doesn't it? Let everything I touch become gold. Yes, gold. And so that continuation of the idea of gold, full stop, yes, gold, the way that the writer has phrased that shows just how greedy Midas is for the gold. Okay. Now, number C says, how does the list of superlative adjectives help to emphasize his greed? So here you are being tested on grammar. How does the list of superlative adjectives help to emphasize Midas's greed? Now, what is a superlative adjective? So I'm just being quiet so you can type and think. Okay, there's nothing coming through at the moment. So I'm sorry if I start answering before you've had a time to, oh, here we go. The finest, yes, okay, good. So how does the list of superlative adjectives help to emphasize his greed? And it starts with the finest, that list of adjectives, the purest, yes, good, and the brightest. Very good, okay. So you know your superlative adjectives, or some of you do. And when something is a superlative adjective, it is the best. It is in the form of the best that it could possibly be, the greatest, the best or the greatest that it can possibly be. So it's not just fine gold, it's the finest. It's not just pure gold, it's the purest. He wants the best in the entire world, the greatest quality that could exist. And that's how, it also emphasizes how greedy he is. Because it's not just gold that he wants the best, okay? And another way of relating to the idea of superlative adjectives is to think of a comparative adjective. So let's look at the word finest. You'll have at its root, fine. Then you'll have the comparative, something that compares itself to the root, okay? So fine is the root verb, the root adjective, sorry. Comparative is finer than, or finer. And then the superlative, the greatest possible quantity that something can be or amount that something can be would be the finest. Okay, so fine, finer, finest, and that is the superlative. And by using the superlative, the writer is emphasizing Midas's greed. Okay. So these are explained in your book. So repetition is saying or writing something more than once to create an effect. And superlative adjective, a word describing the most that something can be. For example, the biggest, the coldest. Okay. Now, Midas is granted his wish. So a god, a Greek god, has been listening and granted him his wish to be able to turn everything he touches into gold. And in the next part of the story, he tests, sorry, there's a bit of a word left off there, tests his new abilities. Read the text and identify the different things that Midas turns to gold. So let's see what happens. He broke a twig from a low branch of oak. The leaves turned to heavy gold as he stared at them, and his mouth went dry. He felt his brain move strangely like a muscle. He picked up a stone and weighed it in his hand. As it doubled its weight, then doubled it again and became bright yellow. Move down. He brushed his hand over a clump of grass. The blade stayed bent, soft ribbons of gold foil. A ripe ear of corn was crisp and dry and light as he plucked it, but a heavy slug of gold, intricately braided as he rolled it between his palms. It was then a cold thought seemed to whisper. He had wanted to chew the milky grains, but none broke shaftily free from their pockets. Now, when something breaks shaftily, it's like the dry casing of a seed. So you'll have the wheat, you'll roll it between your fingers, and the casing will fall off. That's the shaft, the outer layer, and then you can eat the seed or the grains. And so here, he wanted to chew the milky grains, but none broke shaftily free from their pockets. Look at what is happening, okay? Just look at that again, okay? So he broke a twig from a low branch of oak, and what happens? The leaves turn to gold, and he stares at it, and his mouth goes dry, like, wow, this is a realization, right? Oh, something good is happening here for him. And he felt his brain move strangely like a muscle. This is his new power at work. He picked up a stone and weighed it in his hand, and it doubled its weight and doubled it and became bright yellow. It's turning to gold, and this is a stone, and now it's turned to gold. Just how rich is this king going to be? He brushed his hand over a clump of grass, and the blade stayed bent. They became kind of like gold foil. So there is no end to the kinds of things that he can turn to gold. But here at the end, note that something else starts to happen. A ripe ear of corn was crisp and dry and light as he plucked it, but here is a word that shows a turn in idea. Some sort of contrast is going to happen now. But a heavy slug of gold, intricately braided as he rolled it between his palms. Okay. So it was corn, but then it became a slug of gold. Interesting description there. It was then that a cold thought seemed to whisper. Something is suggested. He had wanted to chew the milky grains, but none broke chaffily free from their pockets. Do you see what's going on there? What is happening there? Actually, let me just come down a bit to see if there's a question. So what has ultimately happened in the passage? I'm just going to bring the chat box up. It really doesn't want to come up. Sorry, guys. There's a bit of a delay in my trying to bring up the chat box and it appearing on my screen. Okay. Right. Okay. So here, he could turn people into gold. Yeah, exactly. And he will be very limited in what he's been able to do. Like if he wanted to play a musical instrument, it's also going to be able to turn, it's going to turn to gold and he won't be able to play it. What else would turn to gold? What else would turn to gold? And ultimately my question is, food, good. Food would turn to gold. And that's a problem, right? Everything, yes. And so, do you see how at first, and water, yes, water would turn to gold. A real problem. His daughter, okay, good. You know the story, guys. That's brilliant. Good, I'm glad. For those of you who don't know, please go and have a look at it. It's quite a short story. You know, it is read as a sort of a fairy tale to children, so it's short. Yeah, this is a problem. So we can see already there are suggestions of this problem that occurs in this turn of phrase, the but. And so he starts out, yeah, in a really sort of amazed mood, but then things start going a bit wrong. Now, there is a worksheet that the teacher's resources supply for this exercise, and it says, it's all about explaining how language can describe character. That's what we're looking at. And this is specifically for question 4 and 5 in your student book. And it says, use flowchart to explore how the writer shows 4 things that King Midas is thinking or feeling. Begin with a statement, then provide a quotation, and finish by explaining the effect. So what they want you to do is look at 4 main ideas that occurred in the bit we just read. You're going to make a statement about your first idea that you come across. For example, here's the first one. At first, Midas is impressed by his abilities. That's the statement you make because you're analyzing the passage. You're trying to unpack the meaning in the passage. So at first, Midas is impressed by his abilities. Okay, great. That's our statement. So this is the statement. But now we need to provide a quote to support that statement, the fact that Midas is impressed by his abilities. So what quote could we write in here to show that Midas is impressed by his abilities at first? What do you see in the first section that shows his amazement? What do you see there? Yes, good. Oh, brilliant. You know the legend well. Well done. Okay, so yes, his mouth went dry. Yes, that's right. Yeah, so his mouth went dry. But what else? What else does he do? What else happens there? That's one of the things that happens, because look, there's an and. His mouth went dry. There's a word I'm looking for specifically. Stared. Yes, good. Okay. I know you think it might be the gold, but it's not. It's actually the staring. He stared, because when you stare at something, it's like there's this sense of amazement, isn't there? So we could take this quote. He stared at them and his mouth went dry. That would be the quote we could take. And I'm putting the quote marks around it to show that's what we could write as our support quote. So here, they've actually also provided an explanation of the effects that something like that would create. So look here, you provide a quotation, and we've highlighted the one we would use in the text to support this statement, and finish by explaining the effect. And this is what a lot of students struggle with, this third phase of analysis. You can give a statement, you can make an observation, you can prove it with a quote, but what do you do with it? Well, here's one they have suggested. The verb stared shows that he is amazed by what is happening. And they go on to explain this further. Why? What is it about staring that conveys this idea of amazement? He can't take his eyes, this should be off the leaves turning to gold. He can't take his eyes off the leaves turning to gold. He's staring. Okay. So that is what suggests his amazement. All right. He wants to test out his abilities on more objects. So here's another statement. Midas wants to test out his abilities on more objects. So what is the statement that supports that idea? He wants to test his abilities. What suggests that? Wow, I'm so sorry. I cannot get to the chat box very easily. It's just terrible. Yes, he felt his brain move strangely. Good. Yes. He felt his brain move strangely, like a muscle even. Okay, here we go. So something is happening. There's, he's staring, and now he's got a desire or the thought to carry on doing this exercise to test his abilities. And so he felt his brain move strangely, like a muscle. So let's say that we said that. And then how do we explain that effect? Well, the simile, the one we've just read, shows his desire to test his new skill. Well, how so? The adverb could be pointing out how this is new and unusual. The adverb, what adverb? What adverb tells us this is something new and unusual? And remember, we're looking at this line here. No, don't stop here. Alt-H. Okay. Strangely, good, yes. Strangely is an adverb. All right. An adverb describes a verb. The verb is move. And how does the movement take place? Well, strangely. So that's how you know something is an adverb, if it's describing a verb. And adverbs generally, not always, but generally end on ly. Okay. So this shows us that it's something new and unusual. Right. Now, let's look at the next statement we could make about 4 things that King Midas is thinking or feeling. Well, he begins to feel uneasy. All right, he begins to feel uneasy. And here they've supplied the quote. It was then that a cold thought seemed to whisper. Okay, so now we know that the metaphor, this is a metaphor because it's comparing 2 things, shows that something is wrong because the adjective cold implies a chilling idea and the verb whisper sounds sinister. Okay, we've run out of time, everybody, but I would just like you to try and go through the rest of this exercise in your student books for yourselves. And remember that a copy of this video will be available on YouTube. If you just type in the search term CambriLearn English, you'll find it. It should be up sometime next week. Okay, thank you all so much for joining me.